After 2 centuries dominated by economic progress, technological development, social exploitation and environmental degradation, the 21st century has already revealed itself as the century in which the Earth strikes back. Within academia, both the ecological disasters from Katrina to Fukushima, as well as long-term developments, think of global warming and the rising of the sea level, are quickly responded to. This has led, for instance, to development of new functional nanomaterials which, without doing harm to the environment, are believed to secure our energy needs in the nearby future, as well as restoring the CO2 balance that we humans have presumably disturbed. More frequently, the ecological concerns are responded to in terms of management, environmental management, think of conservation biology, and the management of consumption of resources, think of water management. With much attention for the ecosystems that one way or the other serve as a precondition for human well-being, these technologies and methodologies search for ways to control or limit environmental change as defined from our perspective. The research impact is a sociological concept. It demands a search for paths to positively affect our colleagues and our species, yet it has nothing to do with the Earth we live and with the life we live. So the dominant ideas in ecological thinking are first of all meant to secure our human needs. We can think in terms of energy and land use, in terms of food production, in terms of general economics. They acknowledge that we live in what is called the Anthropocene, which is a very popular concept in policy circles these days. The Anthropocene. But for some reason, the analytic strategies and positivist solutions refuse to critique the deeply anthropocentrist dogmas that thrive underneath. And anthropocentrism is a term that I prefer over humanism. As if we have to explain ourselves, our relations with the Earth, and even the Earth from a human perspective. This is strange because recent ecological developments have more than ever shown us that, and this is a quote from the introduction to Walter Reed's work, 3 Ecologies, quote, "Human beings are a fungal growth of which the planet is completely unaware." I like that. So if we are truly interested in the Earth, in understanding our role in it, in mapping the forces that include us and that travel its surface, a radically new and non-anthropocentric ecology has to surface. There is a strong tradition that we might refer to as a continental naturalism, as it offers us a very different analysis of the state of the Earth today. With canonical key figures such as Spinoza, I think it all starts with Spinoza, Nietzsche and Bergson. They are currently being revived in new materialism, speculative pragmatism and speculative realism. There is more than enough thinking available that allows us to come up with an alternative, or to occupy these discussions, as Deleuze said it. Deleuze defines occupation as making forces that are ordinarily imperceptive, sensible, resonant or visible. The current state of the Earth, of life, demands us to change our thinking about nature, about matter, about technology, and about our role in a fundamental way. Tackling the anthropocentrism, in a more general term, the theory of the subject that lies underneath embedded in the dominant ideas about ecology, about modernism as a whole, is then our key concern. Especially in the writings of Kant, as they revived into German idealism, phenomenology, and perhaps even in critical thinking, have established the central role of man in thought, removing us from the Earth we live, alienating us from each other and even from ourselves. Meillassoux even concludes that Kant's thoughts, and especially his subject, the I think, which forms the fulcrum of his thinking, turns into the very catastrophe for thinking. Meillassoux, echoing Foucault and many other key figures in the humanities after '68, shows us how this 200-year rule of Kantian anthropocentrism has paralyzed the central concepts we need for any ecological thought to come about. This explains why we cannot just add an idea to the discussions of sustainability today. We need to revise thought radically. And we have to acknowledge that we got stuck, and that's also a quote from Meillassoux, we got stuck, in explaining everything there could possibly be in terms of consciousness and language. The linguistic term is by all means yet another Kantian revolution. Meillassoux quotes Francis Wolff in order to summarize the impossible position that we are in today. Long quote. He gives an example of the tree. Very ecological. To be conscious of the tree is to be conscious of the tree itself, and not the idea of the tree. To speak about the tree is not just to utter a word, but to speak about a thing. Consequently, consciousness and language enclose the world within themselves only insofar as, conversely, they are entirely contained by it. We are in consciousness or language as in a transparent cage. Everything is outside, it is impossible to get out. This is why Meillassoux is always in search for the grand dehors, the great outside. Nature is just one of those concepts that has turned completely Kafkaesque. Omnipresent, yet impossible to reach, it has turned into a major power with unlimited moral and political potential. Analyzing the way it is used in ecological discussions today, it seems to come close to how Foucault and Canguilhem analyzed the normal in earlier days. For these kinds of reasons, contemporary literary criticist Timothy Morton even suggests in Ecology in which we get rid of the concept of nature altogether, claiming that it is too soft to target these days, it is too theological. Morton calls for an ecology without nature, and in response to Morton, Slavoj Zizek even went further and searched for an ecology against nature, against the idea of a stable, unchangeable, necessarily good and fragile equilibrium that is permanently being harmed by culture, by technology, and by us evil human beings, unable to know the true nature of nature. So now I'm going to talk about ecology. What's really inspired as the alternative. Henri Bergson attacked reason, claiming that, quote, we must add that there are, behind reason, human beings who have made mankind divine, and who have thus stamped a divine character on reason, which is the essential attribute of man. This is Spinoza. Thus he proposed an anti-intellectualism which was to turn morality into a discipline demanded from nature. This is again a quote from Bergson, a discipline demanded, morality as a discipline demanded from nature. A materialist necessity. This is how Deleuze would describe this in Foucault and Leibniz. His naturalism is not so much written against post-Kantian thought, but rather proposes to reread it and to affirm it radically, thus revealing the minor histories that have been at work in it. Only this way, by pushing dualism to an extreme, as he calls it, we're still talking about Bergson, its oppositions, such as mind versus body, subject versus object, nature versus culture, technology versus the earth, are traversed and shown necessarily entwining. Only thus we can show that nature has never been the stable equilibrium which culture disturbs. And only thus we can show that technology is not against nature. On the contrary, technology is an abstraction of the forces of nature, which is then about conforming to nature, as Whitehead told us long ago. Occupying ecology, or occupied this ecological discussion, is about turning ecology into an ecosophy in the spirit of Gregory Bateson and Felix Guattari. Especially the timely pamphlet of the latter, entitled The Three Ecologies, I just quoted the introduction already, has paved the way for a serious ecological alternative, showing us how environmental ecology links to social ecology and mental ecology, immediately doing away with the post-Keynesian oppositions that we want to leave behind. Also, as these transversal lines are non-exclusive and non-reductionists, they at the same time give us a much more affirmative contribution to ecology compared to the above mentioned and much appreciated Morton and Zizek. And Morton talked about ecology without nature, Zizek talked about ecology against nature. I think Guattari has much more interesting things to say in the end. Much more about, much more in line with what Deleuze calls, and to occupy the discussion. It means not to oppose against it, but to kind of find your way in it, to expand it. Showing how the three ecologies are necessarily entangled, ecosophy never reduces today's ecological disasters and long-term developments to cultural and technological and human causes, but considers them consequential to a series of knots and faults between the three ecologies, which consequently leads Guattari to conclude that, in the quote here, the only true response to the ecological crisis is on a global scale, provided that it brings about an authentic political, social, and cultural revolution, reshaping the objectives of the production of both material and immaterial assets. Turning ecology into ecosophy, a complete system of thought, Guattari then concludes that, quote, ecology must stop being associated with the image of a small nature-loving minority or with qualified specialists. Ecology, in my sense, questions the whole of subjectivity and capitalistic power formations whose sweeping progress cannot be guaranteed to continue as it has for the past decade. End quote. Note that this was written in 1980, by the way. That's in my footnote. Echoing Foucault, Guattari concludes that the ecological disasters and long-term developments all imply the same dominant modes of valorizing human activities, which are first of all those of the emporium of the global market, that, quote, destroys specific value systems and puts on the same plane of equivalence material assets, cultural assets, wildlife assets, etc. Economic progress, technological development, social exploitation and environmental degradation are then not so much caused by human beings, by cultural harm in nature, but follow the capitalist ideal of profit for its humans. That means the toughest and most widespread anthropocentrism known. To occupy is not about resisting the capitalist forces, but rather to map their ecologies, to expand our perception. To occupy that means that we accept that we cannot save the world, that we have to be able to allow the world to save the world. And this is by all means an activist philosophy. It demands us to think what Massumi calls the ecology of the powers of existence, becoming in the midst, creative change taking place, self-enjoying, humanly or no, humanly and more. And we can only do that, as Nietzsche put it, for a type of humanity that should be bred for a species of man that does not yet exist.